You ever have one of those moments where you're so stunned, you don't even know what to say? Well, imagine sitting on your couch on a quiet Saturday night, halfway through your favorite TV show, when your front door suddenly swings open with a bang so loud it shakes the picture frames on the wall. And standing there in my own living room is HOA Karen, flanked by 2 police officers. And no, I'm not talking about a polite knock or a hello, can we talk? I mean, she literally kicked the door open like she was raiding a drug den. The funny thing? She looked ready to gloat, until her eyes fell on the person sitting next to me, and in that instant, her smug expression collapsed like a cheap folding chair. She turned pale, and I mean pale like she'd just seen the ghost of her worst nightmare. But let me back up for a second, because this story didn't start with the door getting kicked in. It started about a month ago, when I moved into this perfect little neighborhood run by a homeowners association that, on paper, was supposed to keep things tidy and peaceful. But in reality, it was Karen's personal kingdom. She didn't just enforce the rules, she invented them on the spot. It started small. A friendly note on my door about my trash can being visible for more than 15 minutes. Then another about my lawn being a quarter-inch too long. At first, I laughed it off. I dealt with busybodies before, but Karen wasn't your average HOA nitpicker. She was the type who patrolled the neighborhood at night with a flashlight, looking for infractions. The type who saw the HOA bylaws, not as guidelines, but as a weapon. Then one day, she spotted my guest. See, my best friend from high school, Marcus, had come to stay with me for a few weeks. Marcus isn't just anybody, he's a former military intelligence officer who now works in a certain, let's just say, federal capacity. The man is built like a tank and carries himself with the kind of confidence that makes people either respect him or get out of his way. But Karen, she didn't like him from the second she saw him unloading his bags from his SUV. A few hours after Marcus arrived, I found another note taped to my door, this one accusing me of harboring a suspicious individual. Suspicious? Really? The guy was wearing cargo shorts and a t-shirt, not sneaking around in a ski mask. I ignored it. Big mistake. Over the next week, I caught her peering over my fence, watching us like we were plotting a bank robbery. Marcus thought it was hilarious. "You've got your own neighborhood surveillance program," he joked, but I was getting fed up. Things came to a head when Karen claimed Marcus had intimidated her during one of her morning walks. What actually happened? She was strutting down the sidewalk, and Marcus, being polite, stepped aside and said, "Good morning." That's it. Apparently, a calm greeting from a tall, muscular man counted as intimidation in Karen's rulebook. Then came the late-night incident. It was around p.m. when I got a text from Karen, an all-caps warning telling me that unauthorized guests were prohibited unless pre-approved by the HOA board. I didn't even respond. That's when Marcus chuckled and said, "She's escalating. Just watch." And boy, was he right. The next night, around 9:45, there was a pounding at my door. Not a knock pounding. When I opened it, there was Karen, red-faced, flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She claimed she'd received an anonymous tip that I was hiding dangerous individuals in my home. Now, I'm a law-abiding guy, but I wasn't about to let them just barge in. I asked for a warrant. One of the officers shifted uncomfortably and said they were just doing a wellness check based on a concerned neighbor's call. But before I could stop her, Karen shoved forward and kicked the door open, like she was starring in her own cop drama. And that's when she saw Marcus. He was sitting calmly on the couch, sipping tea like nothing was happening. But the second her eyes locked on him, her face drained of color, she stammered, her voice trembling, "Why you?" The cops looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Marcus slowly set his cup down, stood up, and said in the calmest, most authoritative tone I've ever heard, "Ma'am, do you realize what you've just done?" Karen froze. She suddenly looked like she wanted to melt into the floor. The cops were still confused, and I was enjoying every second. What Karen didn't know and was about to find out was that Marcus wasn't just my friend. He was someone very high up in an agency that could make her life extremely complicated. And from the way her hands started shaking, I had the feeling she already knew exactly who he was. For a few long seconds, the room was frozen in a strange silence. You could hear the faint tick of my wall clock and the muffled hum of a neighbor's air conditioning outside. Nobody moved. Even the officers at the doorway just stood there, waiting for someone to speak first. Marcus broke the silence. He didn't raise his voice, but the authority in his tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Officers," he began evenly, "you've been called here under false pretenses. There is no threat inside this home, and this woman," he turned his head slightly toward Karen, "has just committed forced entry. That's a criminal offense." The taller of the two officers glanced at his partner, both of them clearly unsure what they just walked into. The shorter one cleared his throat and asked, "Ma'am, did you physically open this door without the homeowner's consent?" Karen's voice wobbled as she spoke. "I was assisting law enforcement. This is an HOA matter, and I have the authority to intervene in situations that you don't have any authority here," Marcus interrupted sharply, stepping forward just enough to make her flinch. "Not in this state, not under the law, and certainly not in my presence." The officers shifted uncomfortably. I could see it in their eyes. They were starting to realize they'd been dragged into something personal, something messy, something they didn't want to touch with the 10-foot pole. Karen tried to regroup, her face tightening. "I didn't know who was staying here. I had serious reports that he could be dangerous." Marcus tilted his head, almost smiling, but his eyes stayed cold. "Karen, you know exactly who I am." Her pupils widened, and that was when I noticed something. This wasn't just surprise on her face. This was recognition, the kind that comes from personal history. She wasn't just intimidated by his presence. She was afraid of him. "Do I need to remind you?" Marcus continued slowly. "What happened the last time you interfered in my work?" Karen's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. Her hands, which had been resting on her hips in defiance, now hung limply at her sides. I wasn't interfering. You were," Marcus said simply, cutting her off. "And you're doing it again. Only this time, you're doing it on private property. That's trespassing, forced entry, and harassment. All on record. You sure you want to keep talking?" The officers now looked directly at her. "Ma'am," the taller one said firmly, "we're going to have to step outside and sort this out." Karen opened her mouth to argue, but caught Marcus's gaze again and froze. I've seen a lot of people try to stand their ground, but in that moment, it was like she just remembered something terrifying, something from a past encounter that still kept her up at night. They guided her toward the door, but Marcus held up a hand. "One moment, officers. Before she leaves," he turned to me. "Do you want to press charges?" I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say yes, to see her face when the cuffs went on. But Marcus shook his head slightly, as if telling me to hold off. "Not yet," he said to the officers on my behalf. "Let's give her one last chance to walk away without making things worse for herself." Karen practically bolted out the door, her once confident stride reduced to a stiff shuffle. The officers gave me a quick apology before following her out. When the door shut, I turned to Marcus. "Okay, you have got to tell me what that was about." She looked like she'd seen a ghost. Marcus sat back down on the couch, picking up his tea like nothing had happened. "Let's just say, she and I crossed paths years ago, and she learned a hard lesson about sticking her nose where it doesn't belong. I didn't expect to see her again. Clearly, she didn't expect to see me either." I pressed him for details, but Marcus waved me off. "Trust me," he said. "The less you know, the better." For the next 2 days, Karen vanished from her usual patrol routes. No notes on my door, no anonymous complaints to the HOA. It was blissfully quiet, but that peace didn't last. On the 3rd day, an official-looking envelope showed up in my mailbox. Inside was a letter from the HOA board, accusing me of harboring individuals engaged in undisclosed activities and threatening me with fines and possible eviction. I handed the letter to Marcus. He read it once, smirked, and said, "You want me to handle this?" I thought about it. Every part of me wanted to say yes, but I was curious what exactly did handle this mean for Marcus. The next morning, he made a series of phone calls. They weren't long conversations, less than a minute each, but the way he spoke was calm, deliberate, and clearly pulling strings I didn't even know existed. By lunchtime, my phone rang. It was the HOA president, not Karen. He sounded nervous, overly polite. "Mr. Carter, I wanted to apologize for the letter you received. It was a misunderstanding. There will be no fines, no eviction proceedings, and certain members of our board will be stepping down effective immediately." When I hung up, Marcus was sipping his tea again, looking as relaxed as if he just ordered takeout. "You didn't," I said. "I did," he replied without looking up. Later that evening, a neighbor filled me in on the gossip. Apparently, Karen had been removed from the HOA board and was banned from holding any official HOA position in the state for the next 5 years. The story going around was that she had grossly abused her authority and jeopardized the safety and privacy of residents. A week later, I spotted her walking her dog. She crossed the street the second she saw me, keeping her eyes locked on the ground the entire time. Marcus, watching from the porch, just chuckled. "Sometimes the best payback," he said, "is letting someone know you could ruin them, and then not even bothering to do it." I thought about that for a long moment. In a way, Marcus was right. Karen's fear wasn't about what he had done to her this time. It was about what she knew he could do, and how powerless she'd be to stop it. Since then, I haven't had a single issue with the HOA. And as for Karen, let's just say she walks a little quicker past my house and never, ever looks up.